You're listening to episode 17 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Hi everyone, welcome back. You may notice I'm updating the format a little bit, thanks to helpful suggestions from our regular listeners. Thanks to DJ Grothy of the podcast For Good Reason. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I'm liberating some of the good bits of structure from that podcast. If you're interested in critical thinking and skeptic topics, check out For Good Reason. And yes, I've provided a link on the episode page for this episode. Today we're going to talk about labels, how we designate ourselves as whatever. Labels are invaluable as a tool in human communication. How we refer to ourselves and to our practice can help us find fellow students and helps others understand what our point of view might be. But they can also hinder us as we either become too attached to our designations or as we misunderstand one another's intent in label use. So sit back, relax, have a nice tea, Earl Grey, hot. And let's see what Linda and Dana have to say about how they handle and view labels. And today we're here with Linda Blanchard.
Hello.
And Dana Nuri.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about labels today, and specifically how we identify ourselves in this practice. And it's interesting because those of us who are in this conversation right now have very similar thoughts about this, but how we denote ourselves varies for specific reasons. So, Linda, maybe we can start with you, particularly as one of the founders of the Skeptical Buddhists on Facebook. If you could tell us about how you came to that particular title and how you refer to yourself in this practice.
Well, I believe I borrowed the term skeptical Buddhist from the online email group that you can find at sana.org. They don't label themselves, I think, that way quite as much nowadays, but the reason skeptical Buddhists works for me is because although skepticism is a label applied to some of the opponents of the Buddha in his time, it's a different sort of skepticism that we're talking about here. The skeptics that get made fun of in the early suttas are those who just wouldn't believe in anything, who wouldn't take a stand on anything. And that's not what the Buddha practices or what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the skepticism that just questions everything. What do I know? What do I not really know? And that really is the root of what the Buddha talked about. So I think that definition of skepticism, trying to get a more accurate view of the world by questioning, is a fair term for what the Buddha teaches. And I go with Buddhist because I really am a believer that there is one person who originates the teachings here, and that he really had a unique way of looking at things that fits together pretty well perfectly. And so I stand up as a Buddhist because I really am a follower of the Buddha. So skeptical Buddhist, that's the title I go with.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, Dana, you had a blog post conveniently the day I was going to be reaching out to you guys to say, hey, let's schedule this talk about labels that we've been putting off for the past couple of months. And it was beautifully said. And for folks who are listening to the podcast on iTunes or through some other means, do come to the companion website for the Secular Buddhist, thesecularbuddhist.com, and take a look at the episode for this one because I will be linking to Dana's blog post about labels. Dana, why don't you tell us about that and how you address yourself as a practitioner?
Sure. One of the things that really struck me when I first got into Buddhism were the teachings on labels and language constructs and so forth, because I had some experience with labels and the way I identified through them long before I even got into Buddhism. I had been learning to write, and I wanted to be a writer, and people would ask me, what do you do? And I would say, I'm a writer. And they would come back with the question, are you published? No. Does that mean I'm not a writer? And so I fussed with this label for years. And then when I went from writing to web development and people asked me, what do you do? I still wanted to say writer because I identified so heavily through it. So when I got into Buddhism, some of the teachers would say, give up all those labels, and I could just feel this inner tension, And so
they're my labels.
Yes, exactly. But it piqued my curiosity. It got me to question labels and how I identify through them and how they affect me. And I realized, okay, the first label I'm going to play with and explore is that of Buddhist. What happens if I drop this label? And I have to admit, it was very uncomfortable for me for a long time because I found a lot of pride in being a Buddhist. There was so much about Buddhism that had freed me up and opened me up that I was really starting to identify with that label, and I could see how I was solidifying it. And at some point, we have to let it go. We have to let go of the teachings and everything. So I thought, okay, someday this is going to be a problem. I'm going to let it go now. And when I did, it was amazing because it opened me up to more of the teachings and more exploration. And so I decided that the way I refer to myself is an atheist who practices Buddhism. Mm-hmm. So Buddhism to me is really about the practice. The teachings open us up to the deeper practice and exploration. I do still call myself an atheist. I have a lot of attachment, a lot of issues there that I'm working on. Someday I'll drop that too. And just be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice trajectory to go in, yeah.
Yeah, for language purposes, labels are very important. We speak with words, and labels are important. It's what's happening internally that can get sticky and ugly and create a lot of suffering.
There's a sutta that has a story about a fellow who's wandering through the woods, and he encounters a little camp of 3 of the Buddhist followers who are talking about making dinner. It's your turn to make the dinner. Well, it's your turn to do the dishes. It's not my turn. It's your turn. And the guy wanders on and goes and talks to the Buddha and says, I met a couple of your arahants, your very advanced followers, and they were all saying, you this, I that, and me something else. They can't really be your followers, are they? Because there is no self, and they were talking about themselves. And the Buddha points out that, we have to have labels in order to communicate with each other in ordinary ways. So, for me, labeling myself as a Buddhist, I'm not particularly attached to it as a shiny badge to wear. I need to communicate with others, and I feel that Buddhism would be a help to a lot of people. And if they never see a Buddhist or somebody who identifies themselves as a Buddhist and how they behave, then how are they going to know what's out there?
Right. And at first for me, when I called myself a Buddhist for many years, it was a shield for me, I realized over time. Because I had come from a very religious background, it stated I'm not Christian, but I'm something, whereas atheist is almost, it doesn't really point at anything.
It's a negative
right?
proposition.
Yeah. And at that time, I needed something,
a label to hide
right.
behind, or to basically give you something else to identify with.
Right.
Sort of a half step.
It was a half step, and people react differently to you saying I'm Buddhist rather than I'm atheist. I get a knee-jerk reaction when I say I'm an atheist very often. And now, I'm comfortable with that. But at the time, I wasn't. And I find it interesting now when people ask me what my religion is, and I say I don't have one, but I do practice Buddhism. That often generates conversation.
Yeah, it requires some
I'm able to, I feel like I'm able to clear up some myths about Buddhism because of that, and describing what the practice is, and that everybody can practice it, even if you are in a religion. In fact, I hope others do. So it's really interesting the way conversation goes if you use a label or if you don't.
It's interesting that in the how we identify religiously versus Buddhism as a practice, how I came into this whole labeling thing is early on when I had started a Facebook page of my own. They've got that, religion, how you designate
right. How do you
there.
categorize your page?
Yeah, how do you categorize yourself? And I'd put in, I think, Theravadan Buddhist or something like that. And it didn't quite feel right doing it. Because I'm as you both know, I'm very active in the secular community. I'm very active with the atheist community. I am atheist, and yet I have this practice, which, as we talked about in previous podcasts, I consider spiritual. I don't really have any negative connotations towards spiritual because I don't mean it in a Caspery kind of way. I mean it in a personally uplifting mental development kind of way. And so for a long time, I kept that in there, and then I realized, no. When it comes to the question of religion itself, a more honest designation for me in that particular field, in that particular category, is atheist. And so I had changed that to atheist, and then, and that carried me very nicely in this, because as you both experienced using that word, there tends to be a stronger and more negative connotation with it. As we've seen, there have even been studies about that it's very negative. People's response to atheist.
The general belief is that atheist means I believe there is no God.
Right. Rather than just not believing.
Atheist. Right, exactly. And that's a very different thing than to say, when I also honestly say, I'm Buddhist, then people typically, at least where I live, there's oh, wow, that's really interesting. And they're very curious about that and very interested.
There's a warm fuzziness that goes on with the label of Buddhist.
Not where I live.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Not Texas.
No, that's okay. It's like they're thinking either Dalai Lama, he's always smiling, or Hotaya, the Chinese version, is, the big smiling Buddha, and there's kind of general impression. Right. Whereas with some other folks that I've had the conversation with that are very much a part of a totally different religious framework, there's what made you give up your real religion? Right. Like, well, but nothing. We're really religious in my practice. It's so where that evolved then with coming up with the secular Buddhist, because I toyed a lot and thought very hard about what kinds of words to use for this. And I'd looked at skeptical. Do I use skeptical? Because I see that being associated with, and being very active in that community, with cynicism still in the general populace. Right. And even I was a little, that article I just posted a little bit ago that Stephen Batchelor wrote, that a lot of us have been commenting on, and Linda, the link had been provided to you on that one. That he, a couple of times in that, and I even highlighted it in my printed out copy of this, that he says, skepticism or cynicism, and he blocks them together.
Right.
In his mind, they're inextricably linked.
I have to confess that in Second Life, when I chose to use the skeptical Buddhism, it was partly to be intriguing, to get people to, if I wear that label over my head and go to the humanist meeting, I get lots of people saying, being cynical in Buddhist, that's bad.
Right.
And it's almost like a coffee table book. It's a conversation starter.
Right. Exactly.
And it did draw a lot of people too, because they were curious, what does that mean,
Yeah.
But Ted, you bring up, the main problem of labels, and that is they can be limiting, and we often outgrow them. And I found I did the same thing with my Facebook page. I had that when I started in Buddhism, and I went from Tibetan Buddhism to Zen Buddhism to Theravada Buddhism, and I changed the labels accordingly. And then I decided, no, I'm really an atheist. And then no, that's too harsh. I changed it to non-theist. And the thing is, it's very difficult for us to label ourselves because we are in constant change and growing and morphing, and labels just don't do us justice when we're trying to pin ourselves down like that.
They don't, but they do a really good job of, as we were all saying, of generating the conversation.
I would have thought agnostic was a better label for you, Dana, than atheist anyway. Doesn't agnostic mean I don't believe? Not that I disbelieve in God, which you take it to be atheist, but agnostic means I don't know.
Agnostic seems really wishy-washy to me.
Yeah, to me as well. I
just didn't use it for myself, but you're correct in its definition, it's not taking a stance either way, that I don't believe, but I'm not going to say that it's not. And yeah, I agree. It just felt wishy-washy, and usually, and this is just my own
That's an
mechanism of work. Right. Yeah. This is my own weakness in that I
don't want to be wishy-washy.
Right. I usually have a very strong opinion on something.
Right. It's hard to be wishy-washy.
It's hard to be, right. It's not incorrect. It's just very difficult for me, and I tend to move from very, concrete in something to moving out of it and then into something else. That my period of wishy-washiness is pretty short.
It's interesting because we have, words have very specific meanings. We look them up in the dictionary. And as we've seen in some of the conversations we've had in discussion boards online, that even when we look those up, one dictionary is held as being more valid than another dictionary definition.
Right.
And there are three different definitions, and each one has them in different orders. So
exactly. Yeah. Don't get us started on rebirth, because boy, that's
yeah. Or karma.
Or karma, yeah. And where what's interesting is that I think in Dawkins' Greatest Show on Earth, he talks about atheist agnostic question. It's one of his Either That or God Delusion, one of the books, and he talks about, well, yes, technically agnostic would be a correct term. I'm willing to be convinced if there's strong evidence, but it just doesn't seem to have the same level of real integrity to it as calling myself an atheist, in that I'm as agnostic about God as I am about unicorns. I really, really don't believe in unicorns. I'm sorry, I don't believe in fairies. I just don't. And of course, if someone shows me a breeding colony of fairies or unicorns in the Andes somewhere, okay, I'm willing to be convinced. But really, to say I'm agnostic about that doesn't really cut it. Really, I'm an atheist about it. I don't believe it.
What it's saying is that you have, what you're saying though when you say you're an atheist is that you really don't have any expectation of ever having a belief in God.
Correct.
So you actually are leaning on belief, not any kind of proof in one way or another, because there's probably not going to be, not in our lifetimes anyway. So it's almost, to me, it's almost dishonest to say though that you have no beliefs when you actually do have a belief that there probably is not a God.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Linda, and I do admit that I do believe there's no God, or gods. That is a belief of mine, and I recognize that. And also I want to bring up the point that sometimes we use labels for effect or for attraction. And right now in this time of history in the U.S., I am using the label very specifically on my Facebook page to attract other atheists, because I think in this time we need to support each other. We need to help each other. We need to move religion out of our government. And I have a very specific purpose for calling myself an atheist at this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whereas mine is just the opposite. I don't want to alienate. I'm following the Buddhist practice, which was, they didn't really have the word religion in his day, but he never totally distanced what he taught from the religion of the time. He used all of the language of the religions at the time. So he never said, what I'm teaching is secular. He said, you can find liberation. He used all of the terms that they used and was trying to be inclusive. He didn't condemn people who followed a religion different from his, as long as they were heading in a moral and upright sort of direction. The only folks he condemned were like the wishy-washy skeptic Sanjaya, who wouldn't take a stance on anything, or the people who said that, when you slice a knife into somebody, you're going between molecules, so you're not really killing a human being. Anything you do is okay.
Right. And I would typically agree with that stance of not being antagonistic towards any religious belief, and I'm fine with that, and that it would be my own approach as I am mindful about it, where I do need to then stand up, and where Dana and I are active in some other areas outside of this, is that when those views there's an attempt to impose them on our lives, that's where I'm going to stand up and say, no, separation of church and state.
I agree with that, but I also found it, like Dana finds it liberating to go all the way to atheist, I find it very liberating to go all the way to agnostic and just say, I really don't know. And, I'm just going to work with the things I can know. And so for me, I really am an agnostic. Maybe there's a God. Maybe somebody set the wheel in motion. I have no way of knowing, unless you present me with some really clear facts and evidence. I really am an agnostic. So I'm comfortable there, and also, being the inclusive. But I really support you guys doing outreach to the atheist community. Because
and like I said, someday I will likely drop that label too, because I do recognize, it is a label. I'm using it for a purpose right now, and that's all it is. Labels too are empty, and so I recognize that. And I think one of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is this about labels and language and how we use these and identify through them, and it has had me really examining the way I use labels for myself and how strongly I identified through them, and how much discordance they can cause internally. So I use atheist now quite mindfully, and at some point I suspect that I will decide, okay, I don't need this anymore. Or, it depends how things shift in the U.S. and so forth, I suppose. Or I'll get tired of it and say, nah,
Or don't need as strong an identification with it as I agree with you now at this point.
Right.
It would be nice to not need it. But,
yes,
but we do need it.
It would. Yes, it's a necessary label for me right now.
I was in a group, as we were chatting before, Linda, you mentioned reaching out to the atheist community, and I think for a lot of us it's not much of a reach. It's where we are. It's reaching out to the others. What we've started doing, I remember we had the conversation, when we all got together with Jan last time. We were talking about some of the things at which we suck. And that included reaching out to people of other religions. And I'd mentioned then that I'd had this invite to a meetup group for Faith Club. And based on the conversation I had with you, I'd decided, you know what, you're right. I should actually participate in this. It would be a good thing to do. And so I did attend. We had our first meeting a few weeks ago, and we have another one tomorrow. It'll be our second one. And it was a very interesting group, and how it pertains to labels is that there were very few people in that group had a a specific designation of what their religious affiliation was. And it was challenging for them because most of the folks who were there, as one would expect in a kind of an outreach interfaith dialogue kind of way, were the kinds of people who were interested in finding out about other faiths, whose own practice was in transition, or they were thinking about other things a little more openly. They were still questioning. And so there were people that are like, well, I am this, but I'm looking at this, and I'm borrowing aspects of that, and I'm wondering if, as I suspect, that's more of something we're seeing with our modern cultures, our information age, is people are able to find that stuff more easily. What do you think?
I suspect as an interfaith group that it's going to attract more people like that than I think you'd find a very different reaction if you went and sat in a Sunday service somewhere. You know?
Yeah.
I think then you would find a lot of people who are very much, I am this, and this is the denomination I'm in, and if you don't agree with me, you're
going to burn in hell.
Yes. So I think it's the whole interfaith title that probably attracts people naturally who are more open, and I think that's wonderful. It
is. It's a very good group. It's just interesting that
I'm not sure it's new.
It may not be, and it's where I kind of wonder is, do we have an opportunity as people to see an evolution in how we relate to one another in traditionally spiritual, and doing finger quotes here, spiritual matters, where we don't have to be dyed in the true Baptist.
Because we can find each other more easily through the internet. You're right. It may not be new, but it has the possibility of becoming somewhat more concrete, more able to connect and do things well, learn to reach out and be more accessible, and that could allow it to build. I mean, there's the nice thing about organized religion is that they're organized. They can get together and present a solid front and get out and go do things, whereas, organizing atheists is like herding cats.
It is, because we're part of the hallmarks is I think we're highly independent people.
Yeah, I see that changing though, because the atheist community, if you want to call it, I think it is too scattered to even call it that, but they're feeling like they're under fire. And so now they are trying to unite, and I'm seeing all these Facebook pages, Atheists United, American Atheists, International Atheists, and all these groups coming together now, pooling all these people together online. So I think that's changing. And humanists have attempted to do this.
Yes, to say that atheist does not mean amoral is probably the critical bit.
Right. And that, I think, is what a lot of atheists are trying to express. We're seeing more, we talked last time a little bit about donating to organizations, and now I'm seeing humanist organizations come up where you can donate, and they go out and they help in natural disasters and, the hunger problem and so forth. So we're seeing more organizations come now, not from churches, but from humanist and atheist organizations, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, and the Haiti Relief Project that Richard Dawkins Foundation had made some recommendations, and they ended up in just a matter of days giving hundreds of thousands of dollars through.
Right, I was very excited when I found that, and I donated right away. Yeah. It's really neat to find those and know that there isn't going to be an agenda of any kind pushed on people when they're at their lowest.
Right.
And that makes me feel really good about donating money there, that these people will just be helped, and that's all.
Yeah, the intent is to help people. It's not about furthering a particular agenda.
Right. Not even that, there's no atheist agenda.
Right.
Which I think a lot of Christians think that there is an agenda.
It would be hard to come up with an agenda for the atheists. It would be very difficult. Yes.
Right. And they do argue that atheism is a religion, which I love this analogy that I read, calling an atheism a religion is like calling stamp collecting a hobby when you're not collecting stamps.
I'm not
There
collecting
is no
anything.
You're not doing it.
It depends on how you define religion, though. You can define it narrowly or you can define it broadly. I tend to like broadly because it's inclusive, and I think inclusive is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fond of quoting William James, as you probably all know, where he says, were one asked to characterize the life of religion in the broadest and most general terms possible, one might say it consists in the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. And I think that most of us scientific types do see an unseen order that we would do well to adjust ourselves to. It's called reality.
Well, some of us call it evolution.
Right.
Just, reality, the way things really work, I can go on believing I can eat this cookie and burn off the weight later, but that really isn't, facing reality.
I know too well, yes.
Right. So, I see that for me, that is a religion. It's seeing a higher order, and the way the universe works to me is a way higher order than the way just my little life works.
See, and I see that more as what you're saying, more as a philosophy rather than a religion. Because what you're saying doesn't sound like it includes a God-like thing.
Well, see, I don't say that religion needs God. You're defining religion as having to have a God, whereas I say it just needs something that I would honor and surrender myself to, and reality will do just fine for me.
Yeah, and I think reality is a good word.
Right, that's a broad interpretation. The posting I just put up of on the Facebook fan page for the Secular Buddhist, that there was that debate between Sam Harris and Deepak Chopra, and it was interesting because Harris was making the point that, we have a couple different labels, again, to God, and we can say God as the way the universe works, and in physics and the mathematics of it, that it all works, but we need to understand that that's not what people mean in the religious context of the word God. They mean the invisible sky man.
Something that's conscious. They're a consciousness. Yeah.
Right. Very human-like.
Whereas for me on the reality side, if you want to make it sound a little softer, just call it nature.
Yeah, yes. And that's where naturalism comes in. But
that's right. That's right. But see, that's what I argue. Nature is nature. Reality is reality. And then there's God. And people who believe in God have a very distinct definition of that God. When you start saying, well, God is everything, and then you're getting into metaphysics, not religion.
When you get to the sort of Buddhism that is non-secular, that believes in rebirth and heavens and deities and stuff, there is no God there. There is nobody who is actually controlling your life. The gods are. But so is that not a religion as far as you're concerned?
No, I consider that religious because it includes gods.
Right.
A heaven and a hell.
They don't have
includes
any
the supernatural component.
It's just kind of a weird fuzzy form of religion. But it still includes the heaven, the hells, the gods,
but no conscious deities controlling your life. You can, ask for a little help, and
well, I guess you could argue whether or not they are controlling our lives. Some people may believe they are. That's why the Tibetan Buddhism pray to deities.
Oh yeah, they ask for intervention.
They do ask for intervention. To me,
but
that
the
is
gods aren't always able to intervene according to the mythology. They're just like us. They're just at higher levels. Sometimes they manage, sometimes they really mess up.
But to me, that's religion. I would label that religion.
Yeah, I would share that label. And those fickle gods, why don't they just do what I say? I made the right sacrifices. Come on, my team is supposed to win.
Yeah. It's a spectrum, I think.
And if people believed in Greek mythology, then it would not be mythology, it would be religion. Because in my opinion, mythology,
somebody else's
everything
religion.
is mythology until you
Mythology
start believing it, and then it becomes a religion.
And I bring that up in my discussions with a dear friend of mine that we do have wonderful open discussions with, that I've mentioned before, that He is a very devout Baptist, and we have a wonderful sharing of ideas and mutual respect for one another. And the questions that we kind of go around to is that, he also says he sometimes has his doubts and he sees suffering, and we have wonderful experiences. And for him, the experiences that, Linda and Dana and all that we have, we kind of attribute those to naturalistic reasons. He'll attribute those to supernaturalistic reasons.
Right.
And I said that's okay, it's fine, but why? Why is it that particular framework, why is that one correct versus it not being Thor or the Mormons or that this is or that's or the other things? How do you know it's
Scientology?
Or Scientology? How do you know it's that? And I specifically pick things that I know that he very stridently disagrees with, as do I, like Scientology, for example. And that's always kind of challenging because it makes people think about their labels of, well, I mean it this way. And that's fine, but where does that come from? And I think a point that one of you had made some time ago, one of the first podcasts we did, is that we're kind of lazy sometimes with our word use. Mm-hmm. And that can lead to a lot of muddling of things on top of we just plain mean different things, or we have subtle nuances to the labels that we're putting on. So for me, using the label for the podcast and what the intent of this was is secular Buddhism, where it is a non-religious kind of take it out of that, but it's still Buddhist-y, and that starts a lot of conversations because people look at, if I got a t-shirt that says a secular Buddhist now, they're like, what does that mean?
and I really do like the label pragmatic Buddhism and practical Buddhism and skeptical Buddhism, because like we discussed in an earlier podcast, there are core teachings, the 3 marks of existence that are in all of Buddhism. And when you start working with those, you're really working with life, know.
Right.
And
it's not a dogmatic expression.
Right. It still has the label of Buddhism, but I think eventually we can just drop that too, but eventually you're just in life and you don't need to label it even with Buddhism. And that's why, I practice exploring those to the extent that I can. And I find, you just keep digging and exploring more.
Right. As in when we were talking about meditation, when I was doing one of these interfaith dialogues with the folks at Bethel University, there was a lot of resistance in the crowd to even trying meditation because it was Buddhist meditation.
Right.
And there was a sense of, well, I'm being
doing
something wrong. I'm not being a good Christian if I practice Buddhist meditation. And I'm like, guys, it's not, we don't own the patent. Meditation existed before Buddhism.
Right.
And this practice it's something that people do. And there was some discussions that occurred online after that talk, that, there was one young fellow who came up and he even asked this towards the end of that dialogue in that hall, that is it, illegal for me as a Christian to do meditation? And he was clearly looking for a reason not to even try it.
Right.
So what do you mean by illegal? I mean, I can't give you spiritual advice. You need to talk illegal in that you're violating the
says no meditation in the Bible.
That's the question. It's not one of the 7 deadly sins. You're okay.
And the other one of the things that came up in the conversations online after that was, well, meditation is bad and against our faith because emptying the mind, that's where Satan comes in.
Christians do meditation.
And that's what one of the other people who was up there speaking with us, is one of the professors at Bethel, was saying, is that there is a Christian meditative practice as well. And he
tended to be monastic rather than something
that and I think it's actually quite different though, because they are filling the mind with a concept either of Mary or of Jesus or something, and they are focusing on that concept. Whereas in Buddhist meditation, you're letting things go.
Some Buddhist meditation,
and you're watching the process.
There's, the compassion, right, and the permeating the four quarters with
yes, that's filling the mind then too. Yeah.
So the thing about Buddhist meditation is there are lots of them. But
right. There are lots of different kinds. What kind do you mean?
Right.
Because the Tibetans will also be meditating specifically on a mandala or something specific. And I always I look at that as, yes, that is a focusing of the mind, but then there comes a point during meditation at which you let that go, in the same way that when you start counting the breath meditation, when you're just starting up a meditative practice, eventually you let go of the counting and you let go of the or the Buddha or whatever it is you're using to shackle your mind in one spot until you don't need the chain rattling anymore. Now It's very restful and open.
You're slowly but surely letting go of all of the things you hold on to, and that's, I mean, sometimes I wonder if we're being entirely honest when we say that you can be a Buddhist and be a practitioner of some other religion, because I think with that sort of meditation, the more you practice it and the more you see what your labels are and the things that you're attaching yourselves to, and the more you let go of them and the more you recognize what you do know really and what you don't know, which is vast, you're going to get to the point where I don't think you can really easily be a Christian.
No, you would end up letting go of those beliefs and that faith. And I think that's a good thing. That's why I hope more of them will do it.
All Christians listening to this podcast, ignore what they just said. It's not true. Come listen to us.
It's not brainwashing in the sense that we make you focus on some particular thing and, force you into it. It's actually giving you insight that you're slowly going to be led to over time. But I think
it's just self-awareness, and that's what I tried to explain. Right. I tried to explain to a Christian friend of mine that it's self-awareness at a level that you've probably never experienced, know, and it's amazing and it's wonderful, and you learn to let go and you learn to see how you create ideas and beliefs and all of that. And he just felt, no, this is not something that I should do. I should just focus on praying, and God will tell me if I should do that.
And honestly, it's not always comfortable. I mean, yes,
it is.
You get to the point where you have those lovely peaceful moments, and that would be nice if that was all it was. But
I rarely have those.
Often it's the ugly truth. We see our actual motivations.
Meditation has never been fun for me. I've had 3 experiences that I enjoyed. The rest of the time, it's really
confronting the reality of your life, isn't it?
It's confronting the reality of my busy head. And it's but it's always been beneficial, so I do it.
It is a hard path. It is a hard practice because you're faced with what's really going on with me. What am I doing? And there's no shirking away from it. There's no hiding from it. And that's why it is a challenging practice, because we see how kind of borked up we are. And the response that
But when you stop hiding, it becomes easier.
Right, but it becomes easier as lighten up.
It's so difficult.
Right, and the way I had responded to one of the folks who had said, but that's where Satan comes in. If you have you empty your head, I said, well, bear in mind, it doesn't mean you're unaware. Quite the opposite. It means you're very aware. So
you would see him come in.
Within a context of your religious framework, and I was very, very careful on how I tried to be mindful about how I worded this to them, is if your religious framework is a valid one, all this is going to do is make you more aware of any stuff going on in your head, whether it's from your own natural thoughts coming up, or if there is any outside influence trying to hit you, there's your awareness to that is enhanced.
Right. That's what I had told my friend too. What a perfect time for God to come in and chat with you when you're out of the way, I haven't experienced that, but it seems like it would be a good time.
You do see Satan all the time. You sit there and, you think about your stomach growls and you think about a strawberry and you think the last time it was chocolate dipped and how you shared it with your boyfriend and how hot your boyfriend is.
Yes, and then you have sex.
And the next thing you know, Satan is fully engaged in your brain.
So I think I know what I'm going to the grocery store for now.
So it does give you that sort of clarity. And yeah, Satan may be sneaking into your meditation, but your point, Dana, is really good, that you're actually being very clear and very aware of what's going on so that, you're not undefended.
You'll know. You may still choose sin, but you'll know you're choosing sin.
Yeah, you'll be mindful. Well, and that, it is exactly that. I do things I know are not in my best interest, and I'm mindful doing it. Mm-hmm. And enough times, and then I decide, okay, enough of this. This is not getting me anywhere. I'm not benefiting by this. It's time to let it go.
Maybe I need to change the tagline for the Secular Buddhist to mindful sinning. How about that? And I think on that note, we'll draw our conversation on labels to a close. Dana, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Linda, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.